So now we're going to talk about the 3D DVE. You can see up on our GUI we have the DVE model. Select that and you'll find that the menu will now pop up and it will show you what we can actually make with our 3D DVE. We have 4 channels of DVE within the Kahuna Flare. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 tiles that we can work with, and we also have our active models, which are our slab, fragment, push and squeeze, page turn, ripple and sphere. So for instance, if I wanted just to create a sphere, I simply select my sphere. If I wanted a slab, I select my slab, I go into the model menu, and now I can actually change the zoom and the position. Remember, you can either use your joystick. There we go, there's my slab. Or I could have done it using my rotary controls as well. So notice that my slab has actually got all different types of video actually feeding those sides. If I come back out, I can select any other of the models, or I can go back to using my tiles. Okay, so let's have a look at our picture-in-picture mode. So I'm just creating a picture-in-picture mode using one tile. If I select my tiles, you can see it's got a rotation on. So if I just twist my rotary control, there we go, I've got that effect. I can either rotate it this way, I can rotate it Z on the Z axis, and when I rotate it on the X axis, notice it's actually got a back side to it. So you can actually see in my mimic here, this is called a mimic because it's mimicking the tile up on my program out, that it actually tells me that it's the back of the tile. So at the moment it's actually got the same video as the previous side. So I can change that by selecting surfaces, and now I could say, well, I want to feed it with something else. So let's have a look. What have we got on tile 2? Surface 2. There we go. So now surface 2 has got my aeroplane, and if I go back to my main monitor, there we go, and rotate, I've now got my skier. So those sides are actually independent from one another. We have what we call warps on our 3D DVE tiles. So for instance, we could have a flag wave, and you can see here that this parameter is now active. If I wanted to, if you select the More menu, so that takes me to the sub menu, I can now actually change the angle of that wave. There we go. I could even change the wind machine and the direction of the wind and the speed of the wind. There's a lot of things there that you can actually create and have a bit of fun with, to be honest. If I go back up, I can actually select ripples as well if I wanted to. So activate it and then change the amplitude. There we go. And now we've got a ripple effect. We've also got a mount effect. And then if, for instance, I select my button here, you can see I've actually created a 3 tile effect. If I go back into my model, there we go. I've got 3 tiles active. If I select the 4th, you'll notice that it's actually now full frame, and I'm only seeing 2. And that's because of the priority layers of those DVE tiles. So if I select priority, there we go, you can see that they're all on the same level at the moment. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to keep tile 4 selected and I'm going to give it priority. There we go. So now it's covering all of the other tiles up. If I go back to my model and turn it back off, there we go. It's now gone back to my 3 tile mode, which if I go into the menu, you'll see my tile selector. And again, the mimic mimics what's on the monitor. So tile 3 is my long tile, and then tile 2 is my bottom tile with the yellow border, and tile 1 is the top tile with the white border. And again, if I wanted to rotate, I could literally rotate it, do whatever I want to place it into a specific position. Okay. Now, if I wanted to, I could actually give my DVE tiles some lighting effects. Now you'll notice that there's lighting happening on all three of those tiles, and that's because the lighting can be per tile. So if I go into my DV surface menu, this is where we actually tell the tiles A, what we want to feed to those tiles, and B, the other effects that we can actually create on those tiles. So I mentioned the lighting before. You can see that we've actually got global lighting happening at the moment. I've got some borders as well activated. And if I wanted to select a particular tile, so we'll keep it on surface 2, and do the per surface lighting, you simply select the parameter, turn it on, and there we go, tile 2 has now lightened. And I go into my lighting, and now I've got all of these different options that I can change and create various lighting effects. So I can change the intensity, the type of the light, whether it's a bar or a round. Let's try some of the shading so we can, there we go, actually see the light effect a bit better. There we go. So we've got a nice gleam happening there. And I can even change the type of shine. Can you see that on the second tile? And the specular level. So there's a whole manner of things that we could, again, get quite creative with our lighting, just to decide on obviously what we want to create, whether or not it's a sunset effect or a moonlight effect, or even just lighting for different colours. We can actually create a different coloured light, again, using our matte select. I can scroll through, there's black, red, yellow, all sorts. So you can see there's quite a lot there that we can play with. Now the type of feed that's, or the source that's feeding those tiles, you can actually see here we've got select surface. So for instance, we'll stick with surface 2, it's looking at the aeroplane footage at the moment. And the source mode is DV-AUX2. So surface 2 will always look at DV-AUX2. Now up here, this is telling me what's actually feeding DV-AUX2. So if I select this menu, DV-AUX2 is looking at crosspoint 2. Here we are. So now if I scroll using the rotary control, I'm now looking at my input 3, which is the video of the jet skier. If I wanted to, I could actually scroll through to my other input, and I'm actually now looking at some pelicans. So I can set up any video feeding those DVE tiles. You can see that with each of the surfaces you can create full keys, linear and luma keys, so you're not setting just using the full keys. And what we can also do is, we've seen it before when I demonstrated the mask effect, but we can actually put a defocus or a pixelation. So for instance, if I do that, you can now see that the top tile has a colour correction on it, so it looks old, it's got that sepia effect on. The lower tile has got a defocus on it, and then on the left tile, so the third tile, has got the pixelation effect. Okay, so that's our 3D DVE. So we've covered the colour effects. If I go back to my surface 1, and let's look at the colour effects, there we go. So we've turned on the DVE colour effects, and we select the colour effect menu, and now you can see that I've changed it to sepia or black and white if I need to, or inverse, and then I can select normal or just simply turn it off. But you'll also see that I also have my RGB that I can actually adapt as well. So I can change all of my red gamma, my red gain, my green gamma, anything that obviously is affecting the lighting and the colour of the source that's feeding that tile. The DVE itself is actually being fed via an input, so it's actually a source. So I'm actually seeing it as a DVE output. So it means to say that I can actually key it over a background. So at the moment I'm using key 4 to look at my DVE output, and key 4 is a luma key. If I were to make it a full key, you'll notice that it's now got a black background. Now, that's fine, but maybe you want to have a different background, but you don't want to be able to key it. So if I go back to my DVE model, you'll notice there's a background menu. If I select that background menu and turn it on, you'll now see that I've got video on that background. And again, I can select any source I like to feed that background. And it's not affecting my DVE tiles at all. Go back into my main menu and I can turn off my background and then make it become a Luma key again. So I'm keying over my DVE onto my background. And there you have it. And finally, let's cover the corner pinning. You can see from the image that I've created here that we've got some sort of billboard effects going on, and I've done that using the corner pinning menu. So choose your tile, tile 1, select the corner pinning, whether or not you want to do the top left, the X or the Y position. So if I activate that, if I now move the Y, you'll notice, can you see the top tile up on the program output? I'm now affecting that top corner, the top left corner. So I'm just adjusting it, there we go. And if I wanted to make any additional amendments to the other side, so the top right, again, I can change the Y position or the X position if I need to. And then of course my bottom left, my X axis or my Y axis. And again, bottom right, the same. So you can see, again, it's very, very easy to create a perspective with the corner pinning to create something like a billboard effect or something going into the distance, like the Star Wars effect, for instance. And this is how it would be done in the corner pinning. So now let's cover the stores. Kahuna Flare can have up to 10 output stores. We call them clip stores. We can actually have both stills and video in those clip stores. If I show you here, there's my 10 clip stores which I have loaded, and I'm actually mapping to my panel down here so I can actually have access to. Now you'll see in my store load, this is all my images, whether or not they're videos and stills, available to me, and you'll see that my current project is number 10. Now if I scroll to a different project, you'll see that there's a whole load of other graphics available to me. So all of these graphics are just there waiting for me to load into my clip store. Now if I go back to my project 10, you'll notice that some of these little thumbnails have got letters CK or C. What that actually stands for, well, the C tells me that it's a clip, so it's a piece of video. Now if I, for instance, hit details, it tells me what standard the video is and how long the duration of that clip is. So it's telling me it's 9 seconds and 15 frames. If I go back to my load, and for instance, if I look at store 15, let's have a look, file 15, there we go, that's my snail bug. I have a C and a K. That tells me, of course, the C means the clip, and the K tells me it has a key associated with it. So again, if I select my details, there we are. You can see the fill is the snail logo and the key is the key of that snail logo. And once again, it's telling me how long the duration of that video is, 4 seconds, and again, the standard at which that piece of video is. So I'm getting information very easily before I can actually put it into my store, just so that I know. Once I'm happy with an image, I can then load it into the particular store. So let's say, for instance, I want to load, I don't know, this Times Square image again into store 5. So select it, there we go. You can now see on my preview screen, it's come up instantly. And if I look in my contents, there it is. It's in my store 5, and I'm seeing it on my preview monitor because I'm actually looking at it here, store 5. So when I look at all of these stores, so my 10 clip store outputs, you can actually see which one of those is being used live on air. It's number 2. Clip store 2 is actually live because it shows me that it's red, and I know because it's actually feeding that DVE tile. Now, we can actually store up to 48 seconds worth of uncompressed HD. Within our clip stores, as I said, there's 10 outputs, and we've actually also got what we call our sub-clips. So you'll see here, store 2 is actually live on air because it's red. And then this little number, so 1/11, tells me that that is the first clip of 11 sub-clips. Now, if I touch that image, you'll now see that all of these other images are actually in what we call, as I say, the sub-clips. So even though I'm looking at store 2, I've got all of these other images that I can now select. So, for instance, there's the lady singer up top, and now I can hit a skier, or I can go back up and hit the snowboarder, the American footballers, the flower, the skyline. All of these exist within that one store, store 2. And I can actually load up to 32, that's 32 sub-clips within one store. So even though I've got 10 of these, I can actually add 32 extra within just the one store. If I go into my load, you'll see down here, there's a load mode. And if I scroll to the top, if I were to select new and then hit one of the thumbnails, it would actually just put in one clip and get rid of all the other sub-clips. But if I were to select, let's scroll down to the bottom, insert at end, and let's insert this skateboarder, go into my contents, my sub-clips, scroll down, there he is, right at the bottom. So now I've got 12 sub-clips available. And if I select that, there he is up on my top screen. If I go back to load, if I wanted to, I could actually insert before a particular sub-clip. So if I say insert before, and let's do the bobsleighing, and now I go back in and have a look. There it is. My bobsleigh has now inserted before the skateboarder. So I've got the option to actually load any sub-clip anywhere I like. Go back into load. You've also got replace sub-clip. So as it says, you can replace that if you wanted to. And you've also got append to sub-clip. And what that allows us to do is actually insert another video or still within that actual sub-clip. So if I refer to my sub-clip here, I could then actually insert another image into sub-clip 12. So you can see that sub-clips are so powerful. There's so much space there for me to be able to bring up different images and stills. I can use them for bugs, I can use them for video clips. The sub-clips themselves are very powerful, and within the actual store, the clip store, giving me 10 outputs, I've got this additional sub-clips that I can work with. What we also have is our grabbing facility. So if I select grab, what I can actually do is grab any output from my kahuna. So you'll see, first of all, let's set up a store that I want to grab to. So let's select store 5. Now I'm going to actually select a cross point to grab from. So let's have a look. If I select my quick little grid, you'll see that I've got ME outputs. I've even got cross points that I can select. So any of my, for instance, cameras coming in, any servers, any VTR controls, I can select anything you like. I can even select a store. So I'm going to actually select ME2 preview because I want to, there we go, there's a piece of video up on my preview now. I want to grab that piece of video. So ME2 output 2, I now have the option of grabbing by literally holding my grab and releasing. And now if we look at store 5 and play, there we are. My grabbed piece of video has played. What I could do, I could actually grab a single frame. And now if I look at store 5, there's my single frame. If I play it, of course it's only a single frame. What we could also do is what we call a latching grab. And that allows us to hit the grab and release it. Look at the duration. So this is grabbing the amount of space that's available to me, and then release. Now you'll notice that the time is 4 seconds and 39 frames, and that latching grab could stop when you run out of space. So it's telling me free space is 0%. So you've got single frame to grab. You can grab which by having control over, or you could actually select the latching grab and then release when you're ready. You can also preview the grab, so literally look at your preview when you're ready. And of course you've got your playback. Now if you had audio associated when you're grabbing, you can grab the audio as well, and you'll know that there's audio coming from that feed because your little equalizer bar will show. Now once you've actually grabbed your piece of video or still into your store, that's just sitting in your buffer. So if you want to save it for future, we go into save, we select the project that we're working in, we select a free file, and you can see it's the dashes, so that's actually spare that you can save it in, and you can give it a name. So we just put test, enter and save. And now because it's a piece of video, of course it takes a little bit of time, but there we go, it's fairly quick. So now I've got that image in my store load available to me forever until I physically delete it in my filing system. But you'll also see that there is a little C, so I know that that is a video clip. We have different types of memories. We have snapshots, DMEMS, DVE MEMS and GMEMS. First of all, we'll start off with snapshots. Now this is a pretty simple way of actually memorising a state of an ME. So for instance, I have 2 boxes up on ME1, which I'm happy with, so therefore I want to keep that setting to be able to use for future. So I'm literally going to press and hold one of my user function buttons. Hear the beep? That's confirmed that it's now taken a screenshot or snapshot of my ME. The second type of memory is my DMEM. Now that stands for dynamic memory. So how we save a DMEM is, again, depending on what you want to save. So this time I'm actually going to save ME2 because I like this setting. I've got all of my bugs all up on my program and my logo, so I'm quite happy with that. So this time I'm actually going to save it as a DMEM. So first of all, I mentioned before, everything works in projects within the Kahuna Flare. So remember, if I look at my project number 4, which is my training project, so I select number 4, I select my point, and I'm now going to select number 1 because it's my first DMEM within that project. Now I have to tell Kahuna what is it that I'm actually saving. So it's actually the ME2 that I'm saving. So I select ME2, and again it confirms up on my number pad, so I know exactly what I'm saving, and when I'm happy I select save. And now you'll see up on my GUI it says project 4 DMEM 1, and if I want to I can go into that DMEM and I can give it a name. It's just good housekeeping. So for instance I might say ME2 bugs. There we go. And it's now in there forever until I physically delete it. And there we go. Remember, when I do delete, it confirms, but I'm just going to say no because I've just made that. Now I've made that DMEM on ME2, but it doesn't mean to say that I have to reload it onto ME2. I can actually reload it anywhere I like. So this time I'm going to actually reload it up on ME1. So we select project 4. We hit the file number, so remember it's number 1, and this time we say we're going to load it on ME1. Hit ME1 and load. And you'll now see that ME1 is actually got the same setting as ME2. It shows me here on the panel, and it also shows me up on my preview monitor. So the DMEMs are very useful because, as I say, you don't have to always recall them where you actually save them. It's very, very flexible. Now, if I want to recall my snapshot, I simply press my snapshot. I've gone back to my 2-box effect. If I wanted to save both MEs, so ME1 and ME2, that's where we would save it as a GMEM. G stands for global. So literally anything on the panel and anything like configurations in my GUI, that's where we actually would save as a GMEM. So it's the same principle. We select the project, we select the file number. Now I can select number 1 again because this time it's going to be a GMEM, not a DMEM. I'm going to select ME1 and ME2 because remember I want to save both of these MEs. And now I'm going to say save GMEM. Now we have 2 options. It pops up with 1 soft and 2 hard. The reason being is because if I save this as a soft GMEM, it remembers the state of this DMEM and this DMEM. So it's like reference points too. And if, for instance, I change this snapshot up here, that's within this GMEM, it will remember the latest version of that snapshot. But if I saved it as a hard GMEM, it remembers it and it's set in stone, it's absolute. So whatever you save in this state, it will remember that exactly. But I'm going to save it as number 1, as my soft GMEM. So I'm going to say number 1, enter. And again, if I look into my filing system, my project 4, there's my first GMEM. And there it is, number 1, and it has a little s telling me that it's a soft GMEM. So this time I'm going to put 2 MEs, enter. Okay. So, like I say, with a soft GMEM, if I now make a change, so let's say for instance, let's change the box. Let's move it up a bit. Okay. And now I'm going to resave that snapshot. Okay. So now that when I recall that GMEM, I'm going to turn elements off. There we go. So we've got a blank screen. I'm going to recall that GMEM. So project 4, number 1, and this time GMEM load. And it's remembered my 2 boxes in that latest snapshot that I created, not the first one that I saved, because like I said, it's reference points to, it's remembered the latest version of that snapshot. But if I were to save this as a hard GMEM, say if I change that now down to here, there we go, and now save it again, project 4, now file 2, because it's a different GMEM, ME1 and ME2, save GMEM, this time hard, so number 2, and enter. That is a hard GMEM. There we go, number 2, H for hard. So I'm going to put 2 MEs, and I'll just put plus. Okay, enter. There we go. So if I now recall the first GMEM, so 4, project 1, GMEM load, okay, that's one state. And if I remember the other GMEM, so 4, file 2, GMEM load, it's now remembered that setting. So you can see, number 1 is a softer GMEM, which remembers reference point 2 elements. And a hard GMEM is something that's absolute. It, no matter what, if I were to change that ME, it will always remember this state. And just to make you aware that the hard GMEM, of course, takes up more memory because there's bigger information, more information within that GMEM. We also have DVE MEMs. So it's exactly the same as a DMEM, but it's purely for the DVE. So if I set something up within my DVE, then when I go to save it, I do the same thing, project 4, a file number, so let's say number 1, and I just select DVE this time and save. And this time I go into my DVE and there it is, number 1, and I can just let's put 2 tiles. There we go, enter. I'll go back to my projects, there we are. I've got 1 DMEM, 1 DVE MEM and 2 GMEMs. So when I load a GMEM, I'm loading it from this number pad up here. When I recall GMEMs, I do it from here, and DMEMs, I do it from here. But there is another way. You don't have to always use this number pad. You could actually set up one of your pages so one of your user function pages, to actually become a gmem page or a dmem page. And I'll show you how to set that up in the user config menu. Kahuna Flare can have up to 100 projects within the filing system. That means to say that within those projects I can store my memories, my macros, my stills, my timelines. You'll notice up on the GUI here I have a list of existing projects already. Now if I wanted to create a new project, I would simply scroll using the rotary control to an available number, say number 4, and then hit New Project. Now you can see I've got a new line here, a fresh project that I'm ready to give a name to. So remember, using the red rectangle, double pop and give it a name. So for instance, let's just put in training. Enter. There we go. It's all now ready to go to save your memories, whether they're DMEMs or GMEMs or DVEMEMs, into that main project. Notice that the project below, number 10, that's already got some memories and macros already in that I've actually created specifically for this DVD. So I can now actually go into those different elements. So for instance, if I go into my GMEMs, this gives me a list of all of the GMEMs that are actually available to me within that project. Notice that they've got little H's next to the numbers. That's telling me what type of GMEM it is. So whether or not it's a soft or a hard GMEM. If I wanted to delete one of the files, then for instance I could select and then I just say delete. Now remember, when you do go to delete something, the good thing with Kahuna Flare is that it always prompts you. So it says, are you sure? And you say yes or no. So if I just cancel that. So it's a good way of just making sure that you don't delete something that you're not supposed to. If I go into my DMEM list, again there's a whole list of all of my DMEMs available to me, when they were made as well, so it gives me the date and the time. And then if I go through to my macros, again there's a whole list of all of my macros available to me. Don't forget, you can have 1,000 DMEMs, 1,000 GMEMs and 1,000 macros per project. So if I go through to all of these other menus, if I go to my import and export, you'll see now I've got all of these options where I can actually import files or I can export them. So if I knew that I was going to work on a Kahuna, say halfway around the world, I could actually export my project and then take it with me and import it on the other Kahuna system ready for me to set up my show. So let's just, for instance, say I want to export a project. I select project, select the project and open. Then you can choose the project that you want to export. So let's say number 10, because that's what we're working in, and select it. Notice the little green button, so that's actually just confirming what I've actually selected. Then I say next, and then I say select device. Now you can see I've actually got a USB stick into my USB port. So I can actually export my project onto this disk, or I could actually attach a hard drive if I wanted to, or I could even do it via eSATA on the mainframe. So I can select my folder if I want to, or I could select a new folder. So let's say new folder, and I could name it, so rename, and I could say training. So once that's highlighted, I can now say start, and it will start processing, and it will tell me how long that project will actually take. I can cancel, and I can purge, so I can literally clear off what I was actually doing. If I go up, and now I go back to my import export, I could actually now import information. So let's just say a DMEM, for instance. Remember, select the device. You'll see there's a list already in my mainframe at the back, but I'm actually going to use the generic one, which is my little USB drive here. So this is what's actually on my USB drive. And now I'm going to say, let's have a look in my projects, and I'm going to say open. Let's look at project 10. There's some DMEMs, and there we go. So for instance, I want to select that memory, and now I could say where I want to put it. So I could just say import, and it will import it in the next available space in my project 10. Or I could say I want it specifically to go into a specific file number. So I could literally scroll using my rotary control. Let's just say number 63. And when I select import, it will import into Project 10, file 63. Or I could actually retain the numbers where that original file was made in the first place. So if I select retain number, wherever that DMEM was made, say it was made on a kahuna halfway across the world, and somebody, whoever made it in Project 4 in file number 1. It would remember those details and retain it in that project and that file number. And I would say, OK, import, and it would import it back into Project 4 and into file 1. But if I just turn that back off and I say import, it will now import and it tells me, OK, it's complete and it's OK. Remember, DMEM files are actually very small. It's just data files, so there's not a lot of memory that's needed. Then, if I wanted to export anything else, then I can literally select my configurations if I wanted to. Say yes. Or if I wanted to find out if something was actually importing or exporting, I could say import export status, and it takes me to this screen here. So I know if something's happening whilst I'm sitting on the kahuna. And then the other useful menu to use is the actual status logs. So that I can actually export a full report. If anything happens, I can then actually send it to the service guys, and then they can actually see what had happened in the system. I can also back up my system, which is quite useful to do on the odd occasion. It's always worth, for instance, if you've got a lot of graphics and a lot of memories that you've created, it's worth exporting the whole of your system and backing it all up onto a hard drive, just to keep for safe sake. And then I can manage my media as well. So I can actually, the removable device configuration, I can actually give names to, and I can see the filing system, the device type. It tells me that it's a USB, which is correct. So it just gives me information. That's purely what the filing system is all about. If you wanted to delete a project, again, as I say, just select the delete. And remember, if you wanted to lock something because you don't want other people saving their own memories and macros into your project, then select lock. And now you can see the little padlock there. That's actually locked down that project. So if I were to save anything, it won't let me. To unlock it, simply unlock. And then it's free to actually save your memories into. Hi and welcome to the Kahuna Flare training programme. My name is Jodie Watt and I'm the Switcher Operations Specialist for Snell. So today we're going to look at the Kahuna Flare. It's a 2ME system. So before we do anything, let's take a look at the panel and the GUI that we'll be working on today. So here we have ME1 and ME2. We have our preview program bus and we have our key buses. This row here is our mnemonics. And each one of these are all our inputs that's actually coming into the system, be it cameras, servers, VTR, stores. You can see they're all mapped that I can actually access quite easily. We've also got our key bus up here, and these actually double up for keys 1, key 2, key 3, and key 4. We also have our utility buses here, which I can actually access as well, but I'll go into that later on. We also have our arrow buttons. Now, when I hit this arrow key, you'll notice we've now got a shifted layer. So if I'm dealing with a lot of cameras, I find this is really useful to actually access them very quickly. Let's move on to these 4 buttons. These are called our dynamic mix effects, and what they allow us to do is actually copy MEs and bring them closer or switch them around however we feel we want to work. So for instance, ME1, ME2. Now I've changed that to ME1, and you'll notice as I hit my keys, it's actually copying up on ME1 up here. So I can literally build my effects up on ME1, and then when I'm happy, literally double pop, I've gone back to ME2 and I can forget about ME1. This is particularly useful if, for instance, I'm working on a 4ME panel and my ME1 is right up the top. Sometimes you don't have a lot of space, so you want to bring it down closer to you to be able to build your effects. So that becomes very, very useful. Okay, let's move on to the transition control area. This is to do with everything that we want to transition, be it backgrounds, keys, whether we want to wipe them on, mix them off, cut, or even do an auto transition. It's all done through this area here, and we'll go into detail a bit more later. Then we have our user function pad. This I find really good, really powerful. I can actually attach macros, I can recall memories, I can even load stores from this pad, and you'll see that I've actually got 11 pages that I can work with, and on each page there are 11 buttons, so whatever page I go to I can have all my different macros and my setups, so I can make my program and my operations a lot simpler. Then we move on to the key control area. So everything we do with our key, we do from this system. So whether or not we actually say, okay, I want a Luma key, or maybe I want a Chroma key, I do it all from this area here. Everything to do with our key control, it's this area. We have assignable control area. And again, anything that we do with our keys, for instance, if I wanted to resize a key, these assignable controls, as it says, literally assigns themselves to that parameter that we're working with. So these are quite useful because I can access things very, very quickly, which when you're live and you need to do something on the fly, it becomes very useful. Then we have the ME enables area, and this helps us to include things within our memories. So for instance, if I wanted to build a setup, for instance, just with 2 keys, and I want to ignore the other keys, I could literally turn them off from here. I could say omit the sources that I'm using. So again, this becomes very useful when I want to include things within my memories or even omit things from my memories. If we then move up over to this area on the panel, this is our number pad, and this is where we actually save our memories. So I would literally, everything in Kahuna is project based, so I would literally save my DMEMs or my GMEMs up here, and I would load it into a project and then a file number and then save it as a DMEM or a GMEM. Of course, we'll go into that little bit of detail later. Then we've got the panel control, and again, everything to do with the panel, we actually have little shortcut buttons here that help us improve our operations. So I've got ME locks, so if I've set something up on a particular ME and I don't want to touch it again, I could simply lock that ME down, and you'll now notice I can't actually switch to any cameras, any sources. I've locked that ME down, so it becomes very useful. Then on this area here, I've got my timeline edit control. So everything to do with my timelines, I do purely from this area. So again, it's very clean. I know what I'm working with. It's just this area up here. The joystick, now this assigns itself to the timeline. It can assign itself to the resize engines, to the DVE. This becomes very useful. So again, I can use my joystick from here. I can use my buttons up on my GUI, or I can even actually use, remember, my assignable control buttons down here. It's totally flexible, however you, the operator, want to work. Okay, so that's our panel. Then let's move up to the GUI. You'll notice that we've got buttons in sections. That's again very easy to help me navigate through my GUI. So for instance, anything to do with my source, so be it my colour correction, my stores, my cross points, all sources available to me, I can actually access the menus directly from here. Then we move down to the transition area, so anything to do with the transition, be it DVE transitions, the keys, macros, they're all found in this menu, in this set of buttons here. Then we move down to the DVE, and you can see anything to do with my 2D DVE, which is my resize engines, or my 3D DVE, again, I find very easily in these menus here. Then the last section is my system setup. So anything to do with my configurations on how I actually set my engineering config, my user config, how the panel's set out, it's all done via these buttons here. We have the delegate area, and this is very useful for, again, navigating and delegating what we want to work with. So for instance, in this menu at the moment, it's telling me that I'm working in ME2 key 1. But if I wanted to switch to ME1 key 1, I'd simply select ME1. And now it confirms again what I'm working with. So I can't get lost, it's very easy to use. We then move on to these little useful buttons here, and in fact if I just show you all of these all become useful because I can actually normalise my parameters. So if I've made any changes, so for instance I adjust some parameters and I want to normalise them back to a default setting, I double pop and it's all gone back to a blank canvas, which is very useful when I'm resizing different keys. I've got an undo and a redo, like you would find on a computer, for instance. So if I make any changes and I want to change my mind and undo it, and I undo that action, I simply press my undo. And that undo will always undo the action. It won't undo and then redo the undo. It literally keeps undoing. Then I've got my copy and paste buttons, again very similar to what you would find on a computer. So if I wanted to copy parameters, then I would simply copy. So for instance, if I change the parameters, I would hold down my copy, select the parameters, and again it pops up with what I've actually selected, and then I can, for instance, go to another key and then paste the parameters on those sections there. So paste, paste, paste. And again, it's prompting you as to what you want to paste. So it's very quick to create, for instance, a two-box effect. You don't have to do it all manually. You can do it very quickly. Then we've got our navigation buttons. So again, literally, if I want to go back to a previous menu, I simply go back, and it's taken me back to a menu that I was last looking at. And if I want to go to my top menu, I'd simply select my up button, and it's taken me right to the top of my menu before I go anywhere else. So I know exactly where I am. Then we have the snap norm buttons and our rotary controls here, or sometimes known as shaft encoders. So for instance, these buttons help me go back to a stage where I'm back at a default stage. So you saw me change my parameter using the rotary control. And then if I wanted to, if I double pop that button, it takes me back to 0. So again, I don't have to manually change things. I could literally double pop and there it is back to 0. You'll notice that I've got these different symbols telling me what I can do with those parameters. So when I want to change anything, so let's, for instance, we'll stick with the resize positions. The red blobs, they actually tell me that I can use my rotary controls here. But you'll also notice that there are little red triangles, and they're telling me that I can actually use my joystick. So I could literally move my joystick left to right, and notice that my X position is changing. And I can go up and down, and my Y position is now changing. And likewise with my zoom, if I twist my joystick, you'll notice that my zoom parameter is changing. So once again, as an operator, I can use my joystick, I can use my rotary controls, or remember, I can also change my assignable controls down here as well. Okay, the other emblems that will help you is actually the red rectangle here as well. If I double pop that, there we go, a keyboard pops up, and I can now, for instance, give my memories file names, I can give my projects names. It's just good housekeeping. And of course, you don't have to have a keyboard attached. However, if you do have a keyboard, you can actually attach it to your USB port here, and there's also 2 on the back. So again, you could attach, I don't know, keyboards, HID devices, for instance, and these are very useful if I want to import or export files as well. I can simply put in my USB port and export or import files from there. Okay, So now that I've given you a navigation of the panel and the GUI, we'll now move on to the operation of the MEs themselves. We're now going to talk about the key control area. So I have 4 keys per ME on my Kahuna Flare. My key 1, select my key 1, take to air. Key 2, select key 2, take to air. Key 3, and key 4, key 4. So, as you can see up on my main program, I've got 4 keys happening, which I've just demonstrated. Each of those keys can become linear keys, luma keys. I could also create chroma keys, and I can also resize those keys. So I'm going to go through those one at a time. So first of all, we have key 1. And if we look at key 1 at the moment, it's actually a full key. Key 2 is actually a luminance key. If I make that a full key, you'll notice it's now got some background. So I want to get rid of that. So hence why now I've actually called that or made that a luma key. The way that we actually do that is in the setup. So for instance, key 2 is looking at my bug, my Kahuna Flare bug. And I've actually married up that store, that bug, with another store, allowing me to couple those keys together, which then allow me to create a luminance key. My key 3 is a linear key, and again I've done something similar. So key 3 is looking at an alternative bug, and it's actually coupled with the key of that graphic. And that's why when, again, if I select couple key, it's being able to key it out and allowing me to actually create a linear key. If I made that full, there we go, that's just now demonstrated that it's actually made with a black background. Make that back into a linear key, and again I can now see behind. We've also got our chroma key effect, so there we go. So my key 1 is now looking at my chroma key material. So key 1 looking at my chroma key. I now select chroma key and self because that's what we do when we chroma key. If I select the chroma button, up pops the chroma key menu on my GUI. At the moment, of course, she's on a green screen and I want to be able to see behind her, so I want to key away that green. So what I'm going to do is press my preview key button, and up pops a cursor on my preview monitor. I'm now going to select my colour picker area, and using my joystick, because again I've got my red triangles telling me that I can use my joystick, I'm going to move the cursor to a different shade of green. Now I can see it visually on my preview monitor, but we can also see it on my GUI. Notice the colour sample here. If I move my joystick, it's changing green. So I can simply select that colour green, it takes a colour sample, I can move my cursor across and take another green sample. There we go. You can see I've taken a different green shade of green. I can take up to 8 samples to get the clean chroma key that I need. I now go to my second stage, which is preview in the foreground. So notice there's a lot of noise with this lady, with the lady's head. So therefore, I'm going to clean up the foreground using my clip and my game. Notice that on my GUI, within this menu, each of the parameters have been broken down, so it's very quick and very easy to actually clean up my chroma key. So, cleaning up my foreground, I just change my clip, there we go, and just adjust my game. Okay, so we've now made her more of a solid white. I now take off my preview, and there we go, we've got a nice chroma key. So let's take a look at the other key control parameters that we can work with on each of our keys. So let's take a look at key 2 and let's add a border to it. There we go, we've got a nice bright pink border going on, but I want to change that to a drop shadow. So I'm going to select drop shadow, And now I'm going to just change the position. Look at that there. There we go. And I can move it all the way around if I want to, back down, any direction that I wish. So that's pretty cool. In fact, I'm going to change the colour of that because the pink's a bit too much. So how about the black? And maybe let's give it an opacity as well. There we go. Nice. So now we've got a nice shadow on that Kahuna Flare logo. What we could do with key 1, let's add another border on key 1. There we go. And again, by default, we have the nice bright pink colour. But let's give that an extrusion. Now what extrusion does, it gives you that depth of field. So I'm going to change the direction of that border. There we go. And again, let's change the colour. We could give it black, we could do white, whatever you prefer. Don't forget, you can actually insert it with a utility bus as well if you want to, so you can have video going into that border. Okay, so that's our border. What we could do is we could actually change colour correction on our keys as well if we want to. So select your key, select the bus colour, so turning it on in your key control area, and now again it pops up onto our GUI and we can change the brightness, the contrast, the saturation, do whatever you like. Don't forget, if you think, oh, don't like that, we can normalise it. So don't forget, we can either snap norm our button, take it back to our default setting, or remember, if I readjust those again, I can go back to normal. And away we go. We also have a mask. If we select mask on our key, we again just touch the mask button. Okay, and this time you'll see that the mask GUI pops up, and I can now turn on my mask. I can change the type of mask that I'm working with, so we could do a circle, we can do bars, we can do a cross, whatever you want to work with. This menu, again, you've got all of the different flexibility of changing the pattern of your mask. Now, again, we're not limited to one mask, we've actually got 2 mask patterns on each of our MEs. So, preset mask 1 and preset mask 2. So again, you can do a blend of masks if you wish. Again, turn on your mask 2 and again choose the type of pattern that you want depending on what you want to mask. Turn it back off and you go back to just the 1 mask, and then again if you want to increase the level of that mask area. And we can do that with all of our other keys if we wish. Now with each of our keys, you'll notice, if I go back to our 4 keys up there, some of them are actually smaller than others, and that's because we've actually used what we call a resize engine, and that works like a 2D DVE. Key 1, looking at resize. If I turn that off, you can now see that my key 1 is full frame, and what I've actually done with key 1 is I've actually done some cropping. So, turn on my resize. Up pops the menu again, so it's all there ready for me to use. And if you'll notice, the crop parameters have all been changed. So if I now adjust some of those, there we go, see that live logo, I'm now adjusting the top and it's cutting that live in half. Okay, let's do that. And if I want to, I could even change the left, and so I've squidged that in a bit more. Look at that, look. So I've made a smaller logo if I want to. Key 2, for instance, I've actually moved across the page. So key 2 has a resize engine on, and again, if I select the parameter, notice that my X, Y and Z position have all been changed. And I know that because obviously it's showing me here, but it's also showing me on my snap norm buttons. Remember, looking at my red triangles, I can now move my key 2 anywhere I like across the page. And if I wanted to, I could even put it down on my lower third. Okay, how cool is that? Now, again, I can do my resize or use my resize on my super keys. If I wanted to, I could actually change the priority layers of those keys. So at the moment, my Kahuna Flare logo is on my lower third, but if I wanted to hide that for a while, then I could simply, making sure key 2 is highlighted, and then up here, we've got little LED lights that's showing me the order of the priority of those key layers. So I'm actually going to change key 2 and change it with key 3. So I'm simply making sure key 2 is lit, and now I'm going to say layer down and layer down again. Okay, so it's actually telling me that key 2 is now behind key 4, the lower third. Can you see that? The red lights have now changed the position or the priority layers. If I wanted to change the other keys, then I simply select key 1, for instance, and now select layer down, and looking at the LED lights, I'll select layer down, and it's swapped over with key 3. So it knows, it's intelligent enough to know to switch the keys to their priority layers, and then keep pressing layer down, and it will change as soon as you select your different key to change the position. Again, let's move that up. So now key 2 is above my lower third. Very useful. So these priority layers and these little hotkeys, they're very useful because these little LED lights are telling me when keys are on air and what layers that they're actually in up on the monitor. Macros are very easy to create in Kahuna Flare. They actually are recorded in real time, and you can actually make up to 1,000 macros per project. And remember, there's 100 projects. So, to begin with, we select our macro button here. Turn it on. It's now turned green. That's actually telling Kahuna, get ready, we're starting to record. So, it won't start recording until I physically press a button. So let's just stick to something simple for the time being. I'm going to select a different source. So I'm just literally going to cut along the program output bus. There we go. It's recorded, so it's turned red. Now if I turn it off, I've now stopped recording. And you'll see, so I've selected the macro menu, here it is. It's got all of my actions that I actually pressed. So you can see, if I select the first action, it's telling me which cross point I selected. Select the second one, again it's telling me the next one, the next one, cross point 20, and so on and so on. It also tells me how long it took for me to actually press those buttons. So if I want to test that macro, I'm going to simply press test macro, and you'll see that my buttons on my panel will actually scroll along the bus. So I want to delete an action, so I'm going to press action delete yes. Notice how it's greyed out. So once I'm happy with that, I would then save that, and it would permanently get rid of that action. If I wanted all of those buttons to actually record at the same time or to play at the same delay, I could select the action that I'm happy with, so let's say 19 frames, and I could ripple that delay all the way through. So ripple delay, I'll say ripple all. So now all of those actions, even though I selected, it took me different times to select those cross points, I can now actually make them all uniform, so I can make them all 19 frames. And again, if I test the macro, they will all take 19 frames before I actually select the actual cross point. So I'm happy with that. If, however, I wanted to go into one and I say, no, I don't want it to be 19 frames, I want it to be longer, I can do. So now it's 1 second. And again, if I go to ripple delay, notice I can say ripple to start, which means to say it will make all of these above that action 1 second, or I can say ripple to end. So if I do that, there we go. All of the actions underneath that one highlighted will now be 1 second. So I'm happy with that. One thing you have to remember is this button up here, use delays. This, if I said no, and now I test the macro, we're literally ignoring these time delays. So it's going to happen, but it's going to happen so fast that you won't see it. So we have to say yes. And I press test macro, and now there we go. It's made the macro run again. So the use delays no is actually very useful when you want to, for instance, trigger off a command. So I'm happy, I've deleted an action I'm more than happy with. So now I'm going to go to my next menu, which is bitmap. Clear edit. This is the bitmap area, and now I have a choice. I can either put the cursor in that bitmaps area, select keyboard, and now I can type in a message. So let's just say test. Okay, enter. Oops, there we go, test. Now I can say save, and in my project, which is for my training project, it's my first project, I can give it a name. So again, we'll just call it test. And save, and now assign it. Now we can assign a macro to our user function pad, which if I do that now, attach, you'll now see it actually says test. So what I wrote in that bitmap now is replicated on the user function pad. And when I run that macro, away it goes. I could assign that macro to any button on my panel. So for instance, I could say, well, I'm not really using, for instance, this button here. So I'm going to attach that macro to this button. And again, if I now select that button, it's now made my macro record. So some people might like to create macros and have them up on this bus up here, which is absolutely what we could do. So I say button attach, and now you see it's all gone blank, and I'm going to attach my button, my macro up here. Remember I said right at the beginning that the panel control buttons, there was a few little buttons that were useful. Well, if I press and hold this macros enable, you'll now see all of the macros that are available to me, and you can see where I've attached that macro there and there and there. Okay, so I'm going to run the macro from that button. The only thing is with that is you might think, well, what's going to happen to these buttons? Because of course they've got their existing facility. So for instance, this is a key 1 selection, which is going to select this source, which is a clip transition coming in. So if we go back into the edit mode, you'll notice that this area here, disable button, we can say yes, which means to say if I resave that macro and overwrite, when I select the macro on this button here, it will run the macro, but it disables the original function. So it will not select the source of key 1. It is purely a macro button. So again, it just shows you how flexible that Kahuna Flare can really be. If I go back into my edit mode, you can also, rather than disable that button, you could say, well, I want the macro to run, but then I also want it to select the source. So I say disable button no, use button delay yes, and I can increase my button delay, and then again I'd resave it. When I select that button, that macro, it will do the macro, and then it will select the source for key 1. So you can see it becomes very, very useful. Once you've created your macro and you're happy and you've attached it, then it will then show in your projects, and you'll see, there we go, there's your macro file number 1. If I go into macros, there it is, test. So now we're going to take a look at operating the ME. So we have our preview program, and we have our preview and program monitors. And at the moment, for instance, if I just wanted to cut, I would simply select my cut button down here. If I wanted to do a mix, I select my mix button. And now, for instance, I could actually select my auto, which does a nice transition there, or I could manually use my T-bar to mix through to the different backgrounds. If I wanted to use a wipe, I would simply select my wipe, And now if I use my T-bar again, I've got a nice wipe going from left to right. If I wanted to change that wipe pattern, I could pop my button and up pops the menu. So now I can quickly select different patterns. There we go, nice circle wipe. I can change to some sort of blinds. I can even scroll down and we can have a nice star wipe, for instance. There we go. And I've even got a box wipe, there we go, look, that I can transition from one to the other. If I wanted to, I could actually add a border. Now, looking at the menu here, with the wipe edge, I first of all need to turn on the border. So once again, select your parameter, turn on the border, and now increase using the rotary control. And you'll see I've got a nice bright red border going on there. If I wanted to change the colour of that border, again simply select your parameter to activate it. And now you'll notice there's a blue grid. If I select that blue grid, this helps me select a colour very quickly. So for instance, if I wanted bright yellow, there we go, nice bright yellow, or again use the grid, and now I can go to a nice subtle grey. What I could do, if I select the local matte, I could even change the colour by simply manually changing the hue, the luminance, and even the saturation to change to the colour that I want or I prefer. The other choice is, if I select the border fill type, at the moment, as I say, we're filling it with a colour, I can actually change that to Utility Bus 1. Now you'll notice that my border is now being filled by video. So remember before I said these buttons here double up as my keys, so this delegate bus are my key 1 to 4, but I've also got these utility buttons here. So if I select Util 1, you'll now notice that it's actually selecting input 1, and now if I select input 3, it's now cut to a different piece of video. So my utility buses allow me to put video into my borders. Again, if I wanted to increase the width to see a bit more of that border, there we go. And now if I transition, it goes through using the border as well. So it's very cool. Notice that I actually have 2 utility buses to select from. So again, if I wanted to select utility 2, then I simply select util 2 and then use this bus to feed the video or the still into utility 2. What we also can have, for instance, if I select, in fact, let's go part way again so you can see, and I'm going to select the parameter here to increase the softness. So I'm just going to soften up the edge there of my wipe. So there we go, a nice soft edge to it. There we go, even soften that even more, look. There we go. If I wanted to, I could even change the position of my actual wipe pattern. Notice that I've got this legend here, and they've got these logos which tell me that I can, or what I can do with that pattern. So if I select my position and I turn it on, again I've got my little triangles telling me I can use my joystick. So I could simply move my pattern across the page. I can go up or down, and I can even rotate it. Can you see this? And now I've got a nice diamond effect. So when I select my T-bar, there we go, I've now moved my transition to the top left corner, and I've been able to do that because it's telling me here what I can actually do with my pattern. The other thing we can do with our white patterns is we can actually blend 2 white patterns together. So for instance, if I select my advanced, and you'll notice here that I've got a secondary wipe pattern going on. There we go, if I scroll down, these are all of my choices. At the moment I've got my 2 circles highlighted and my blend is on. So when I select my T-bar, you'll see, okay, so I've got a mixture of my square and my 2 circles. But you'll also notice that it's doing what we call our radial splits. So you'll see up in these parameters here, radial splits it's telling me it's got 4 at the moment. So if I increase that, there we go, it's now changed the pattern design on my wipe. So I can literally go from one background to another via this very different transition going on there. And I've even got, for instance, my repeats. So at the moment it's off, so let's go part way again. Let's turn it on, and there we go. I've got 2 horizontal repeats and 2 vertical repeats. So again, I can increase that. Look at that, look. That's actually now increased to 5 vertical repeats. So you can see I can actually do quite a lot with just my normal standard wipe patterns by using the advanced menu and actually creating a blend of wipe patterns. Okay. On top of our wipe, so we've mentioned we can do mix, and we can do a wipe. We've also got what we call our mix user. Now, for instance, if I select my mix user button, and again, up pops the menu on my GUI, you'll see that user mix type says matte mix, and it's showing me that it's actually white at the moment. So when I select my auto, you can see it goes through white before it transitions. So in the industry, some people call that a flash mix. So there we go, it's very easy to do. If I wanted to change colour, simply select the matte and then change it, for instance, to black. And now it's gone through black. Again, very quick and easy to create. You'll also notice that we've got our NAM and our FAM mixes. This stands for non-additive mix, and FAM stands for full additive mix. So if I hit my NAM, again I use my T-bar, I'll do that again. Notice what the non-additive mix does. And then if I select my full additive mix, there we go, the slight differences in light there. Okay, go back to my matte, and again use my T-bar, and I'll go through black. So I've got all of these options, and again I've got my mix user 1 and mix user 2, so I can have 2 types set up. So we have our mix, our wipe, our mix user 1. We also have our background 3D DVE transition. So if I turn that on and now use my T-bar, you can see that I've got a push effect going on. I can change that by simply selecting my DVE trans, because remember, anything to do with my transition, I can access the menus very quickly up here on my GUI. And you'll notice what's actually highlighted at the moment. So this transition, which is push 1, is obviously got a red border around it telling me what I'm actually using. But I want to change to a page turn. Simply select my page turn, and now there we go. We've got a very cool page turn going on. And if I scroll down, there's all manner of different patterns that we can use. There we go. And let's see what else we've got. And you can see how very quick I'm actually just changing all of these patterns. Okay, so you can do very cool 3D DVE transitions, and then if you wanted to go back to your default setting, just simply turn it off, and for instance go back to your mix, and you've got a nice mix transition. Now if I go back to my wipe and just do that with my T-bar, if I select my auto button, notice it's going quite quick at the moment. I don't like that, I want to increase that time. So we have this time button down here. At the moment it's telling me that that transition is 10 frames. So I'm going to change that by pressing the time button, and now you'll see this number pad has popped up on my GUI. So I'm going to change it to 1 second. So I'm going to type in 1, enter, and it actually now confirms down here it says time and 1 second. So when I select my auto, there we go. We now have a nice wipe transition that's only 1 second long. Okay, what we can also do is, for instance, hit reverse, use my T-bar, and it will now change the direction of your transition. So now I'm going from right to left rather than left to right. I could even flip-flop. Select my flip-flop, use my T-bar, right to left, left to right, right to left, left to right. And again, I can do that with my auto button as well. Then if I just want to go back to cut, simply select my cut. And remember, we can always cut along the bus as well very quickly if we want to. We also have what we call a clip transition. This allows us to actually roll a piece of video as well as change the background at the same time. We don't have to set it up in macros, we don't have to set it up in timelines. All we have to do is simply select a key, turn on the transition on my key, so this key 4 trans button, and then making sure key 4 is looking at the correct transition. So for instance, key 4 is looking at my clip transition. It's already a piece of video that I've actually got mapped to my desk at the moment. And now if I use my T-bar, there we go. I'll do my T-bar again. In fact, let's select the auto button. Lovely. I'm now transitioning from my preview to my program via a piece of video. Very cool. And that's called a clip transition. The way that that's actually working is, like I said, we've selected the key for independent transition, and over in my key control area, I've actually selected clip. So that's telling Kahuna to actually become a clip transition. And then when you're ready to roll, select your auto and away you go. If you wanted to, you could actually preview your transition by selecting the preview trans button down here. Select your auto, there we go, happy? Great, let's take it to air. Turn it off you go. So let's take a look at our panel config. So if I select the panel config, the menu pops up. It's showing me that in my current project 10, I've actually got one panel config already saved, which is what I've actually created to do this training DVD. So what actually is included in the panel config? Well, if I select Preferences menu, you can see that we've got parameters here that actually allow us to make our operating life a lot easier. So I would always suggest to people turn everything on. So menu tracking, ME in bus tracking, crosspoint tracking, layout tracking, and menu selection button top. The reason being, because if you don't turn these on, then the menu doesn't track. So for instance, when I select the wipe menu, this menu will track and up pops the wipe pattern, so it makes it easier for me to select. Then you've got the other parameter, and it says screensaver timeout. We've also got the lightness of the backlight brightness of our GUI. And then we've got other aspects such as the pop-up numeric keypad to turn on. That was our little blue grid that we want to select for quick selection. So we say yes, turn that on, remote panel pop-ups and pop-up list selectors. So turn everything on. As I say, it just makes life a lot easier when you're operating. If you go to the panel, you can actually select your red lamp brightness, green lamp brightness, orange lamp brightness. Literally, by default, it's all 100% anyway, so I would leave that be. The other areas really mainly to focus on is the key delegate tracking. The reason being is because when I hit my key 1, it actually selects down here key 3, key 2, key 4. So that's always a good button to actually turn on. Then we also have the other sort of handy, useful parameter is the snapshot. Remember when I went through my the DMEMS, the snapshots, GMEMS, when I created a snapshot, we listened for the beep. That actually confirms that it records. So that's what we want to turn on as well, because otherwise you don't have to have it. It's just a nice way of hearing that you've actually confirmed you've saved a snapshot. You've also got the overwrite function as well, because for instance, if you want to overwrite your snapshot, you can overwrite the same snapshot. If you turn that off, then it won't, and you just need to use up another button to create your snapshot with. So, the other menus are the 1U AUX. This only is relevant if you have a 1U AUX panel attached, and that's just literally turning them on or turning them off. The macros menu is literally a duplicate of this menu here, so you can access it via directly the macro button or go back into your panel config, and it's in this menu here. The other item is the button maps. Now this is very useful. The reason being is because, for instance, the engineering team will attach all of the cameras, the VTRs, the servers, all on the back of the mainframe, all into the different inputs and the BNC points. Now, as an operator, I might have a big panel, say 4ME panel, and I might have cameras all the way down the end of the panel, which are quite awkward to actually access. So, for instance, if I want to take those cameras and bring them closer to me, rather than upsetting all of the engineering team, I'd actually create a virtual button map. And it literally is a layer of all of your inputs that you've rejigged around, especially for you to operate, and you haven't touched the actual physical BNCs. So what I've actually done here, I've got one already loaded. Now if I unload it, you'll now see on my panel that there's nothing there. It literally, I've got a few inputs the same name, but the others are just the simple BNCs available to me, and likewise on my shifted layer. Whereas if I load my button map back on, it now pops back with all of my stores and all of my graphics that are available to me. So you can see that it's actually very useful. To create that button map, I would simply select New, and it gives you all of your cross points available to you. And you can now select anything. So for instance, button 1, shifted cross point. I could select a store, let's say store 2. So there's my shifted cross point, the store 2. And the first cross point on the top layer, for instance, could be a matte if I wanted it to be, let's say black. So button 1 would be black, and the shifted layer will be store 2. And I could do that for all of the other buttons, and then when I'm happy, I literally would say save. There we go, it's saved in the next available space, and I can say test, enter, save. It's now there. Now it doesn't automatically load on your ME, you have to physically do that. So select the actual button map you've created, select the ME you want to load it on, and now load it. And then now it confirms 10.2, and there we go, 10.2. And now you can see right down the end it actually says black, so it's worked. So if I want to go back to my other button map, simply select the button map that you want and load, and there we go, we've gone back to my original state. If I want to go and edit a button map, I would simply select it, go into edit, and then go through and, for instance, change the white to red. Then you'd save. You would either create a new one or overwrite that one. And don't forget, if you want to overwrite, it always prompts you. So you could say, oh, no, didn't mean to, cancel, and then create a new one. So button maps are very useful. You can have all different button maps for any ME, and you can have button maps for different banks. The reason being, because if you've got an aux panel attached, it will actually show here in this parameter, and it will read aux panel, and then therefore you can load a button map onto your aux panel. So that's button maps. Preview aux, again, if you've got a preview aux attached, this is where you'd set it up. User functions. Now this is very useful because I mentioned before when we navigated around the panel that we've got user functions on every ME, and these are all independent, or they can be independent from one another. Now there's 11 pages, and each of those pages can be set up as a different type of page type. So at the moment, if I select layouts, you'll see that bank B, which is, in fact, if I select show banks, you can now see that it says bank B and bank A. So bank B, which is ME2, is looking at layout A, and bank A is looking at layout B. So, means to say, if I select page 1 on bank A, they're very different. If we look at the panel now, I've got page 1 with different types of macros, and then I've got page 1 up on ME1 with completely different macros again. So it allows me to have different layouts for different MEs if I wish. And it actually gives me 7 types of layouts because it goes from A to G. I've also got the 11 pages. So again, each of those pages can be different. If I now go to my pages, if we go to page 3, okay, so page 3, I'm looking at a blank page with a couple of macros on, and it says page type, macro snapshot. If I select another page, let's say page 4, I'm going to change that page type to GMEM, which means to say, rather than loading my GMEMs from up here, I could actually load them from here. So I mentioned before, when we create a GMem, all we have to do now is select the GMem, and let's say, so it's number 1, and it confirms it in this button, and you just load, and it would load up the GMem straight away. If I select this page to be a DMem, again, I can do the same. So if I select DMem, it clears that space. I can now, for instance, select DMem 1, load, and it would do whatever DMem 1 was built to do. And then you can see page type, I can go down to ME1 DMem, ME2 DMem, ME3, ME4 DMem, which means to say it specifically will load DMems to that ME. So now that it's actually loaded as ME4, it will load the DMem specifically to ME4. Likewise for DVEs, the stores themselves are actually the page type will load a graphic into that particular store. So store 1, let's have a look. What have we got in there? Okay, so store 1, we've got the live bug. In fact, let's have a look at store 1. Okay, store 1's the live bug. If I now select my store load, and let's for instance choose Times Square because it's nice and bright. So I'm going to type in number 16 because that's what the file number is there, and load. And there it is, up on my program output. I've got my nice bright Times Square. So if we go back to the user function pad, there we go. I can do that for each one of my stores, stores 1 up to 10. And then I have my last page, which is my project. So I can actually load projects from the user function pad as well. And don't forget, you've got other pages. So I could simply select page 5, and then I can say, for instance, make that a GMem page. Page 6, I can make it a DMem page, or to load a store, whatever. I can do whatever I like in my layout A, and I haven't at all affected my layout B, so they can all be different types. I can as well actually change the page number. So by default, for instance, page 7 is called page 7. But if I want to call that something specific, I could go into edit page bitmap, and now I could either write. So again, I could put macros, or just put max, for instance, enter, and there we go, apply, and now my page 7 actually reads max, so rather than a number. You can see that the other pages as well show that there's current project and GMem. If I go into my details, you can actually select a page. So let's have a look, there we go, page 2. And for instance, if I want to know what's going on with that macro which says key prep, you can see I've highlighted it, and I can say locate macro, and there we are. It's now popped to the project and to the macro number. So it gives me that information that I can now go into the macro itself, find it, project 1027, load, there we are, and it gives me the information of exactly what it does. So this user function pad is very useful. If I go into my buttons, again, this is where I can delete if I want to. So I could actually completely clear the macro or the snapshot. I could clear it if it's a clone. And in fact, if I go back into details, I can even move these macros around. So for instance, locate the macro, clear it, select another button, assign it. And now my key prep is down in that corner there. And if I go to page 2, there we are, it's mimicked it. Okay, so that's my user function pad. Then if I go into my button info, this is quite useful. Again, I mentioned before about macros being attached to or assigned to any buttons on the panel. If I wanted to, I could say locate button, press and hold, and it shows all of my active macros or clones. Now there's something happening down here on this little button ME3. So what I could do is select it, and now it tells me exactly what it is. So button name ME3, it tells me that normal button function active, but it tells me there's a macro attached to it, and again it gives me the macro that I can refer to. If I wanted to, I could detach it, say no, I don't want to do that anymore, detach the macro, and there we go. If I press locate button, it's now gone. So this is like an identification process. It's finding out what buttons are where, just in case somebody's attached a macro that you're not familiar with and you want to find out those details. The same goes for clones. If I've attached any clones on the panel, then of course we can locate the clone and then detach it or do something with it if we want to. And last but not least is the USB controllers. And then once you're done and you've set up all of those menus, you can now save that panel config away. That's very important, is always remember to save your configurations. So we say save as, and again, let's make sure it's in the right project, choose an available space, let's just put test again for the minute, enter, save. So I am done and I'll leave that in my system ready to load when I want to load my show. Okay, now that you've saved all of your configurations, your panel, your user config, we can actually set up a show. So when you sit on your panel and you want everything to be loaded instantly, that's how we would do it. We would build the show up so it's easy for you. So this is how we do it. In our top menu, you can see I've already got some shows already set. Now down here in the bottom lozenges here, these blue lozenges, it says configure shows. If I select that, that's now a menu going in for you, ready for you to set up your show. So we select create show. It creates a new space. It says it's telling me it's show 8 because there's 8 in total. We can select an icon. So if there's a manner of different logos in there, you could even put in your own picture if you wanted to. Then you select your current project. So if I just scroll using my rotary control, I'm going to select Kahuna Flare. Then my panel project, I'm going to scroll through again, and then panel config, and I can put Kahuna Flare. Then we select the next parameter, which is my user project. So again, scroll through to your relevant project you want to work in, and your user config that you saved, and then any gmems that you want to recall. So let's go into Kahuna Flare and then let's have a look if there's anything that we want to start off with. So there we go, we've created a gmem that already says Flare Start. Then you have your default project. So if you want, when you do load your show, you always want it to go to a particular project, then of course select the relevant project, and that means to say any memories that you recall, it will always recall it from that particular project that you've set. So you're ready to go, you're happy with everything that's going to be loaded. So now I'm going to say apply changes just to confirm everything. Apply changes. If you want to go back in and give it a name, then we can do, so we could say okay, Flare News for instance, and apply the change again. And then if we go back up, there it is, Flare News. So now, if I want to load everything for that show, press it, it confirms up here, and you can load it or you can go back in and edit. But of course we want to load, so we just select load, and it would load everything that you need, whether it's your panel and your user config. It's a really quick way of setting everything up. So, we've come to the end of our training session on Kahuna Flare. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you found it useful. If you do want to find any further information, please go to our website at snellgroup.com. So let's take a look at timelines. Everything to do with timelines, we actually do up here on the panel in the timeline edit mode. Notice that we have a TL enable button that needs to be turned on for us to be able to work with our timelines. So what do timelines do? Well, for instance, we could have two boxes and we could actually run them back and forwards as if you would in a news report. So how would we actually build that? First things first, I'm going to delete what we actually have pre-made. We have a delete all button in this timeline edit mode, and as you can see, it's now cleared it on our timeline GUI menu. So I'm going to take one of the keys away. We'll just work with one key at the moment. So first of all, if that's what I want to start off with, I need to insert my first keyframe. We select the Insert Modify Ref button. That's now inserted our first keyframe. We can now move our box along. So let's just use my assignable controls here. Okay. And now you'll notice that these 3 buttons have turned red. So it's telling me, okay, I've identified you've made a move, now let's insert the next keyframe. So I'm going to actually insert it to the next position. I'm now going to zoom back, like so, and again insert another keyframe. Going back to our timeline menu, there we are, we have 3 keyframes ready to go. So I'm going to go to the start, notice go to start button, and I'm going to then press run. And there we have it. A very simple timeline. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the start again. I want to find out the information, so I want to be able to do a little bit more editing. So this track here, I'm actually going to double press. It takes me to my second layer, so it's actually now telling me what I've actually built, so key 1. You'll notice these parameters here. There's the offset, which allows me to offset my timeline. And there's the play count. The play count allows me to actually run the timeline at certain number of times. So you can see it goes up to 100, but if I go back, it does say forever. So if I were to run my timeline, it will keep going. Notice it's now running backwards and forwards, there we go, from the beginning, because I've told it to. If I want to stop, just hit my run button again, go back to my start, and now I can change my play count back to 1. And when I run it, it will only do it 1 time. Perfect. Okay. Now I want to find out a little bit more detail. So again, I can double press my track and it takes me into the second layer, which is showing me exactly what I did to create my timeline. And you'll see that it does say that I resized my position, and I also did my zoom, which is correct. So I want to maybe change the profile of my timeline because it's at the moment it's not doing a nice linear across the screen, but maybe I want it to jump. So I'm going to select my keyframe. There we are. My first keyframe tells me that it's doing a curve profile. So I'm going to change that to step. When I run my timeline, it will step. There we go. And then it will continue to do the curve. So if I want all of those keyframes to step, I'm going to select these 2 squares on the right side of the screen. They've turned to a blue tick. And I'm going to, let's just change that to step, go back to run, and now it will step through. There we are, perfect. So I've now got a stepping timeline. If I wanted to insert a pause, I could go to my next keyframe, or my previous keyframe. Notice it's now jumped back to the middle keyframe there, and I'm using this Prev KF button, so previous keyframe. And then you'll see there's a button down here that says Insert Pause or INS Pause. As soon as I select that, you'll see that a little pause button logo has actually popped up on my track up here. So if I go to the beginning and I run, it pauses. My run button has turned orange or amber, and that's prompting me to say, okay, you've got to press me again to continue the timeline to run. And there we are. It's now jumped back. So my stepping has jumped from each keyframe, and if I go back to my previous, remember it's actually paused there, so it's allowed me to take a breath and then carried on with the timeline. If you want to, you can actually change the position of your cursor. So notice the little red triangle there. I can move my current position. And of course, every time I do that, it also changes on my output as well, because of course it's moving along the keyframe. If I wanted to, I could actually select the keyframe or a keyframe and change the position of it. Now notice, as I'm actually moving my rotary control for that keyframe position, the entire tracks are actually moving. All of the keyframes are moving, and that is because my blue tick have been selected. So if I want just the individual keyframe to move, I turn those off and I change my keyframe position, and there we go. We've only got one moving now. So we can actually edit multiple keyframes if we wish. If I go back to the top and if I go to the start, you'll see that I also have my flip-flop and reverse, and they're actually mimicked down here on the panel as well. So I could actually run my timeline backwards and forwards, which is the flip-flop, or I could always play it in reverse if I wanted to, and simply just select them, and it then activates that action. When I'm happy with my timeline, I could actually then say, well, I wanted to do maybe something else, which is something else on the panel. And I could do that via a macro. So you'll notice in this blue lozenge here, if I select the macro, there we go, I've got all of my macros available to me. Now remember, all of our macros are in our projects. So I could go through, scroll through all of the different projects available and see what other macros are there for me to insert. There we go, there's quite a few others. But I return back to my number 10 project, my Kahuna Flare training project, and you'll see, as I say, I've got a whole list of macros that I can choose from. So, if I wanted to select, for instance, subclip 1, and then I want to insert that macro, I simply press the insert button. And you'll now see that my first macro has inserted where my cursor was. If I want to change my cursor to a different position, I can insert another macro. And there we are, there's my second macro. Again, change the position, insert another macro. Every time I insert a macro, you'll see that there are little markers to tell me where they've actually been inserted. And also the grey bar, just showing me, okay, that's the duration of my timeline. Okay, so I'm happy with that. And now I actually want to save this timeline away because I want to be able to use it for the future. So I'm going to go to the start because that's where I want my timeline to always begin. Notice there's an auto go-to position. That is exactly, with that lit, that's exactly where my timeline will start when I save it. If I had left it in the position in the middle and I saved, the auto go-to position would remember that position of that cursor, and that's where the timeline would begin. But I don't want that to happen. I want to start from the beginning. Okay, so saving a timeline is the same principle as when we saved our DMEMs and our GMEMs. So we return to the panel over here, and I'm going to select my project. I'm going to select a file number, so just any number. I've put number 16. I'm going to say ME1 because that's where I created my timeline with my key. And this time I'm going to make sure that this little slash is highlighted, because with that highlighted you'll see that it actually reads timeline. If I turn that off, it's now disappeared. So I'm going to select that again. There we go. But this time I'm also going to press the content button. The reason being is because, yes, I'm including my ME1, and yes, I'm including my timeline, but I've also included some pauses and some macros within my timeline, and they come under the events timeline, which is this button here. So I'm going to turn that on. And if I just go into the enable, so I'll just show you, there we are, macro and pauses. Go back. So I'm going to make sure that that is now saved within my timeline. Because I've included those events, which are the macros and the pauses, it automatically becomes a GMEM. And that is why the Save GMEM is the only button lit, ready to be saved. So I'm going to select Save, I'm going to tell it to be a hard GMEM, and enter. So now everything included in that timeline will be remembered. And I'll prove to you by deleting it all and then recalling that timeline. Number 16 and GMEM load. There we go, and there it is. And if I double pop, you'll notice there's my macros and there's my pauses. So everything that I create in my timeline can be included. If I didn't have any macros or pauses, I could purely save it as a DMEM, again using the same principle, the project, the file, the actual ME that you want to include. And don't forget that you must always remember the slash, because that represents your timeline. So we're just going to cover the user configuration now. As you can see, I can select my user config button and it shows me the actual menu up here on my GUI. You'll see that everything included in my user configuration is all within these menus here. So first things first, I'm going to select the aux setup. If I had an aux panel set up, this is where you'd actually select your aux and then you would select the actual cross point feeding that particular AUX. So once again, you have your little quick selection. You can either choose your cross points, or you could choose a store cross point, DVE, mats, washes, ME outputs, anything that you like that you actually want to feed down your AUX, you would actually select from here. And then you would do the same for all of the other AUXs that you'd be using. BNC outputs, that actually gets covered in the engineering setup guide, so I would refer to that for the information there. Timeline defaults. This is actually where you could set up your timelines that you always want it to be set at when you start creating. So for instance, at the moment, by default, the profile is actually curve, but maybe you want to always work in linear. So change the linear. Notice that the snap norm button has turned orange or amber, and that actually tells you, of course, that it's away from the default setting, but that's how I want to change it. You can also set the smooth, the TCB, the durations effect. There's all manner of things here that you can actually change and then set up for your default settings for your timeline control. Again, ME outputs just show you what outputs are showing what, so whether or not it's your main program or your preview or a clean feed. Again, this gets covered in the engineering setup. GPO, again, GPO setups, this would be done usually by the engineering team. Once again, this actually gets covered in the engineering setup. DVE setup, okay. So when you have a Kahuna flare, you could potentially have a DVE card in the system. This gives you 4 tiles, as we mentioned before in the DVE, the 3D DVE model. So this is where we could actually say, well, where do we want to use those DVE tiles? So for instance, when I was going through the 3D DVE, I was actually using 3 and 4 tiles, and I actually allocated them to my one DVE. If I wanted to, I could actually say, well, I only need to use 2 DVE tiles, so therefore I'm going to just allocate them to my first DVE. And then my second DVE, I'm going to allocate another 2. And the reason being is because I could potentially have, for instance, a 2 tile model effect with perspective on one ME, and then on my other ME, maybe I want a 3D DVE background. So therefore, this allows me to actually share the resources of my DVE across my panel, and I can use them then anywhere I like. So this becomes very, very useful. The safe area, this is actually shows you your 4x3 area, your 16x9, and again this actually would get set up when you would sit on the system to start operating. Store setup. Remember I was saying about our stores actually being coupled together and being married together to create our Luma and linear keys. Well, again, this would actually be set up in the engineering side of things. So, but this is just the menu where you could actually set it up, and you could actually give your stores names. So, for instance, if you're using a particular store, like let's say for instance store 5, and it's always your chroma material, you could then potentially give it a name saying chroma. Your resource linking. Now this is actually very useful because this is where we could actually link various outputs to different other outputs. So for instance, at the moment I've got ME2 background A, which is my main output, so if I just cut along the bus, and I've actually already set up the slave bus, so ME1 background A. Now you can see here, so bus select is ME2 background A, new slave, and again I can just scroll through, but I'm just going to choose ME1 background A, and I'll show you why. Now you must actually turn on your linking, so you need to say overall enable, and then you need to make that's actually now turned on. So when I now select anything on my main program output, you'll notice that ME1 is now following. So I've actually linked these together, and I don't have to do 2 selections at the same time. I can actually literally select one source and it automatically does it on ME1. And this becomes quite useful, for instance, if you're working with multiple standards and you've got one feed going to one channel and one going out in another, you could actually cut the same program but only selecting one ME. What you could also do is you can set up a substitution table, and what that allows you to do, if I go into the menu substitution, you can select any cross point that's available to you. So for instance, let's have a look at bug fill. Okay, there we go, bug fill. Now what I could do is if I select bug fill, I may actually want it to select a different source somewhere else. So for instance, master cross point is my bug fill, and then slave cross point, I want it to actually select something completely different. So let's just say, I don't know, store 1. Okay, so now that I've created that, I would say link enable yes. I could give my link a name, so I just put store. Then I go back into my linking, so I can literally just go back, and here you must say, okay, I need to choose the actual substitution table. So now that is active. So when I actually select my bug fill, there we go, it actually selects store 1 up on the linked ME, the slave ME. So it's allowing me to select the bug here, or the cross point here, and it's substituting for a different cross point up on the second ME. And then you've got your ME linking as well. So I could potentially just link my MEs together so that you'll have a master and then you can have a slave. Very simple. Then you have your skirt setup, but again, this would actually be made within the engineering setup, but potentially you might want to fill the side skirts with video or different colour mat. So let's take a look. I've got an SD source coming through at the moment, and I've got 2 side skirts which are bright red. I actually want to change that. So if I select my ME background skirts, as I say, it's telling me it's red at the moment. If I select my matte selector, there we go, I can scroll through, I can change my colours, and if I wanted to, I could actually select my util bus as well, and whatever feeding utility 1, I could then select the video to feed those side skirts. So go back to my mat, and there we go. Okay. Once I've set up my user config, so all of those settings, I don't want to keep going back in and redoing and resetting, so I want to save that configuration. So we select Save As. Again, like I said before, everything's project based, so I'm going to save this in my particular project. And I'll tell you what, because it's our training project, I'm going to select training, and I can now select a file. So I'll just stay on 0, file 0. I'm going to press my little rectangle to pop up my keyboard, and now I'm going to say, I'm going to call that training as well. There we go, training, enter. Save, and there we are. We've now got this user config all saved, it's in the system, and when I want to sit on any kahuna with this user config in the system, I could just load, and it would load all of those settings that I've pre-made before.